No! Unhand me, you brutes!
Snow with her.
The carriage wheels stopped turning, and Victoria Morgan knew, before a single word was spoken, that something was terribly wrong. Snow pressed against the windows in thick white sheets. The forest of Wintermere stood silent around them, black pines bowing under the weight of winter. Victoria placed one hand on the swell of her stomach. 7 months. The baby shifted beneath her palm, as if it too sensed danger. Duke Arthur Knowles did not look at her. He tapped the carriage door twice with his gloved knuckle, and the guards outside pulled it open. Cold air rushed in like a blade. "Arthur," she whispered, "why have we stopped?" He finally turned his eyes toward her, and there was nothing in them. Not anger, not hatred, just calculation, cold and finished. "Because no bastard will carry my name," he said. Rough hands seized her arms. Victoria was dragged from the warm seat, her slippers scraping against the iron step, her cry swallowed by the wind. The guards threw her down, and the frozen ground struck her cheek so hard the world flashed white. Snow filled her mouth. Her child kicked once, hard and frightened, and she wrapped both arms around her belly and refused to let go. She lifted her head. Arthur stood above her in his black winter coat, untouched by the storm, watching her the way a man watches spilled wine. "I have been faithful to you every day of this marriage," she said. Her voice did not shake. She would not give him that. "Faithful women do not read ledgers that do not belong to them," he answered quietly. And there it was, the truth beneath the lie. He was not abandoning her because he believed she had betrayed him. He was abandoning her because of what she had found in his study 3 nights ago. The numbers, the grain, the names. "Leave her," the Duke ordered. The carriage door closed. The wheels groaned forward. Victoria knelt in the deepening snow, 23 years old, a duchess by law, and a corpse by sunrise, watching the black coach shrink into the grey fog, until the forest swallowed it whole. She did not scream. Screaming wasted warmth, and warmth belonged to her child now. Then, far away through the trees, a horn sounded, low, long, a sound the entire continent had learned to fear. The Emperor of the North was riding through Wintermere. Men said he burned kingdoms. Men said he showed no mercy. By morning, the man who left Victoria to freeze would learn that both of those things were true. Greetings, humble viewers, and welcome once more through the gates of Forbidden Palace. May this day find you warm, well, and far from frozen forests. Our court grows with every telling, and as we march toward the grand milestone of 1,000 subscribers, we ask for your hand upon the banner. If tales of betrayal, forbidden love, buried scandal, and justice rising from the snow bring fire to your spirit, then subscribe to this channel, leave a like upon this story, and take your rightful seat among our noble viewers. And before the tale continues, speak to us in the comments below. From which corner of the world do you watch tonight? And what hour does the clock strike in your land? Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Every subscription, every like, every word you leave carries this palace one candle closer to its goal. And for that, you have our deepest gratitude. Now, without further delay, let us return to the snow. 3 nights before the snow, Victoria had been happy, or she had believed she was, which in a cold marriage often passes for the same thing. She had gone to Arthur's study, looking for sealing wax, to write to her late mother's sister. What she found instead was a ledger bound in green leather, hidden beneath a false panel in the desk, and inside it, columns of numbers that made her blood run slow. Grain. Thousands of sacks of it. Grain that Wintermere's starving villages had been told did not exist, sold across the border at triple price, while children in the northern parishes boiled bark for supper. Beside the numbers were names, lords, magistrates, a bishop, and at the bottom of one page, in her husband's neat, elegant hand, a single line about a marriage contract that had been altered, and an inheritance that was never meant to reach her child. Victoria had closed the ledger and returned it to its hiding place with trembling fingers. She said nothing. Silence, she had learned in 6 years of marriage, was how a woman survived Arthur Knowles. Silence kept the peace. But Arthur kept a servant paid to watch that study, and by dawn he knew exactly which pages had been disturbed. Now, in the snow, the pieces assembled themselves with terrible clarity. The sudden journey to visit a physician in the mountains, the unfamiliar guards, the route through a forest no sane driver would choose in January. He had planned her grave before she had even packed her trunk. Victoria pushed herself upright, her burgundy travel gown already stiffening with ice at the hem. The wind cut through velvet as if it were paper. Somewhere beneath her ribs, her daughter or son turned restlessly. "We do not die quietly," she whispered to the child. "Do you hear me? Whatever we do not die quietly." She chose a direction. Downhill, where rivers ran, where roads followed rivers, and began to walk. Behind her, the snow erased her husband's wheel tracks, as if the marriage itself had never existed. The cold was patient. That was the thing no one told you about winter. It did not attack. It simply waited and took. Victoria's toes went first, fading into numbness inside her ruined slippers. Then her fingers, bruising purple where they clutched the cloak at her throat. Each breath tore out of her in ragged white plumes. She counted her steps in tens, because counting kept her mind from sliding into sleep, and sleep, out here, wore death's face. She thought of the ledger. She made herself think of it, because anger was warmer than grief. Arthur had starved his own tenants. She had seen those villages from her carriage window in autumn, hollow-cheeked mothers, children with wrists like willow twigs, and Arthur had patted her hand and blamed a poor harvest. All the while, his granaries stood full behind locked doors, and his fortune grew fat on hunger. And her child. Victoria stumbled against a fallen pine and clung to it. Her child was the rightful heir to her late father's northern estates, lands that touched the border, lands worth a kingdom's ransom. If the baby was branded a bastard, the inheritance collapsed into Arthur's hands, like snow into a fist. That was the whole design. Shame her, erase her, inherit everything, and if her frozen body was found, blame the one man every noble in Wintermere already feared. Her knee buckled. She went down hard, and this time, crimson dotted the snow where a branch had opened her palm. She stared at the small red stains, strangely bright against all that white. "Get up," she told herself. "Duchesses do not die in ditches." But her legs no longer obeyed. The forest dimmed at the edges. The wind sounded almost gentle now, almost like a lullaby, and that frightened her more than the wolves. Then the ground began to tremble. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. Torchlight bled orange through the trees, and a voice that carried like thunder called the column to a halt. Victoria raised her head from the snow and saw a rider dismount. Tall, dark, wrapped in a wolf-grey cloak, a scar catching the firelight along his brow. The Emperor of the North looked down at the half-frozen woman in the ruined gown, and the forest went very still. Emperor Rowan Weston had burned 3 corrupt courts to the ground before his 35th year, and in all that time, his men had never once seen him hesitate. He hesitated now. "Sire!" Captain Sam Curtis reined in beside him, snow gathering on his trimmed beard. "That is a noble woman, Wintermere colors. If we touch her, we inherit whatever mess left her here, and I would rather inherit a plague." Rowan was already walking. "Sire, the treaty." "The treaty," Rowan said, kneeling in the snow, "does not require me to watch a woman die." Up close, he could see everything. The fine gown ruined by ice. The bruises on her arms shaped exactly like men's hands. the unmistakable curve of her belly, which she shielded even now, half conscious, with both frozen fists. Something old and dangerous shifted behind the Emperor's eyes. Victoria surfaced from the darkness to find a stranger's face above hers, stern as carved granite, a scar at his brow. "Who abandoned you?" His voice was low, roughened by cold. Her lips barely moved. "My husband, his name. If I say it," she breathed, "you will have a war." For the first time in years, something close to a smile touched the Emperor's mouth, and there was no warmth in it at all. "Madam, I brought the war with me." He unclasped his great wolf fur cloak, the cloak the whole continent knew, the one that meant a kingdom was about to answer for its sins, and wrapped it around a stranger and her unborn child. "Curtis, my physician. Now." "You are aware," Sam Curtis said, dismounting with the weary air of a man who had survived 3 sieges and considered all of them simpler than this, "that we came to these mountains to inspect a border, not to adopt a duchess." "Then consider the border inspected." Victoria felt herself lifted as though she weighed nothing, felt the heat of the fire-warmed fur close around her, felt her baby settle beneath it like a small ship reaching harbor. Her last thought before the darkness took her was a strange one. Her husband's hands had thrown her into the snow. A tyrant's hands had lifted her out of it. Perhaps the world had been lying to her about which men were the monsters. Victoria woke to warmth, and for one confused moment, she believed she had died. Then the room sharpened. Stone walls hung with dark banners, a fire tall enough to roast an ox, and a woman with dark curls and steady brown eyes pressing a warm cloth to Victoria's hand. "Slowly," the woman said. "You have been asleep for 2 days. I am Maya Stanley, physician of this fortress. And before you ask the only question that matters, yes, your child is alive. The heartbeat is strong. Frankly, it is stronger than yours." Victoria's eyes flooded before she could stop them. Maya worked as she talked, and she talked the way healers do when they want a patient's mind off her fear. She explained why the cold nearly killed the baby before the mother, how a freezing body pulls its warm blood inward and away from the womb. She explained why Victoria must eat small meals every 2 hours, why her blackened toes must be warmed slowly and never rubbed, why the shaking in her hands was not weakness, but the body burning fuel to make heat. "Remember this, if you remember nothing else," Maya said, wrapping fresh linen. "A pregnant woman in the cold has half the time everyone thinks she has. Warmth, food, and rest are not comforts. They are medicine." The door opened. The Emperor filled it. Out of the storm, Rowan Weston was somehow more alarming, not less. Black imperial coat stitched with silver, gloves of dark leather, that scar cutting pale through his brow. Victoria's fingers closed on the blanket. "You fear me," he said. It was not a question. "They say you burn kingdoms. I burn courts that starve their people, and call it economy." He crossed the room and set something on the table beside her. Her wedding ring. His men had found it in the snow, flung from her finger when she fell. "You may keep it, sell it, or melt it. That choice, like every choice under this roof, is yours. You are not a prisoner here, Lady Morgan. You are a witness. There is a difference." "A witness to what?" "That," the Emperor said, "depends entirely on what you found in your husband's study." Victoria stared at him. She had told no one about the ledger, no one living. "Fear me if you must," Rowan said quietly, turning for the door, "but do not mistake me for the man who left you." The truth arrived a week later, wearing a stolen stable boy's coat and a nervous smile. "Sienna!" Victoria was on her feet before Maya could protest. Her maid, small, freckled, auburn-haired, and very much supposed to be dead, flung herself into her mistress's arms and burst into tears. "They told the household you ran off with a lover, my lady. They told the villagers you were mad. I knew it was a lie, so I did something wicked. I listened at doors, and then I did something worse. She drew a torn, water-stained letter from her boot. "I stole this from the Duke's own fire before it burned." They read it together in the Emperor's council chamber that night. Victoria, Rowan, Sam Curtis, Maya, and the trembling maid. The letter was written in Arthur's hand to a lord of the royal court, and it laid the whole design bare. The grain sold across the border, while Wintermere starved. Prisoners leased in secret as unpaid labor to the mines. A marriage contract forged to strip Victoria's child of the northern estates. And the final stroke, Victoria's death in the snow, to be discovered in spring and blamed upon the Emperor of the North, giving Wintermere's corrupt crown its excuse for war. The council chamber was silent for a long moment. "So the Duke means to accuse you of murdering a Duchess," Sam Curtis said at last, "using the Duchess he murdered. I have fought many stupid men, sire. I confess a certain admiration for an ambitious one." "Captain," Maya said, "there is a pregnant woman present who is the murdered Duchess in question, and she is handling it better than anyone in this room." Victoria barely heard them. She was looking at her own name in her husband's handwriting, listed between grain shipments, like one more item to be disposed of. 6 years of silence. 6 years of believing that if she was quiet enough, gentle enough, patient enough, the marriage would soften. Silence had not kept the peace. Silence had built his fortress for him. "Lady Morgan," Rowan's voice was almost gentle, "I can bring this letter before the Lords of Wintermere, but paper can be called forgery. A living voice cannot. You owe no one this. If you wish, you may stay here in safety, and I will fight this war without you." "No," Victoria said. Her hand rested on her belly, where her child rolled slowly, as if listening. "He made me a ghost. I intend to haunt him in person." Winter deepened, and inside the fortress of ash and ice, something else did too. Rowan taught her the battlefield she would be walking into. Not swords, words, how courts twist a woman's testimony, how an accuser must never weep first, because weeping is called hysteria in a woman and grief in a man. How to answer an insult with a question, so the insult must explain itself in front of witnesses. Victoria was a quicker student than either of them expected. Years of surviving Arthur Knowles, it turned out, had been years of training. "You never once raise your voice," she observed one evening, over a map of Wintermere's great hall. "A man who must shout is a man who is not certain he will be obeyed." "And are you always obeyed, Your Majesty?" "Always," said the Emperor. At the exact moment, Maya marched in and ordered him to move, because his war maps were sitting on her patient's supper tray. He moved. Victoria laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months, and Rowan looked at her the way men look at sunrise after a long campaign. The days wove them together. He walked with her in the ice gardens, shortening his stride to hers without ever appearing to. She learned that the ruthless emperor read poetry badly and knew it, that he had razed corrupt courts but rebuilt every village school in their ruins, that he asked before he ever touched her, even to steady her on the frozen steps. After Arthur, that small, constant asking undid her more than any grand gesture could have. On the night of the midwinter feast, he found her on the battlements, wrapped in his wolf-grey cloak, snow settling in her dark hair. "When this is over," Rowan said, "your lands will be restored. You will be free, wealthy, answerable to no man alive." He paused. "I need you to know that before I say the rest, so you never wonder whether you had a choice." "Say the rest," Victoria whispered. "I am in love with you. I have been since you told a dying woman's joke about ditches and duchesses in your sleep. I want nothing you do not freely give, but I would burn 100 kingdoms before I let anyone put you in the snow again." She kissed him first. That mattered to her, afterward, that she kissed him first, freely, under falling snow, with her child turning gently between them, like a secret both of them already loved. From the courtyard below, Sam Curtis's voice drifted up, deeply unimpressed. "Sire, The War Council has been waiting 1 full hour. I see the border is being inspected again. In Wintermere, Duke Arthur Knowles buried an empty coffin. He wore black superbly. He stood in the cathedral before the assembled nobility, voice breaking with rehearsed grief, and told the kingdom that his beloved wife had been stolen from her carriage by riders flying the emperor's banner. He commissioned a marble memorial. He accepted condolences with red-rimmed eyes, which he achieved, his valet knew, with a raw onion kept in his handkerchief. The lie was working. That was the horror of it. Lords who had dined at Victoria's table wept for her. The crown of Wintermere, deep in the Duke's ledgers and deeper in his debts, called for the realm to arm itself against the northern tyrant. Merchants were taxed for war. Villages already starving were stripped of their last grain. Grain that travelled, by night, into the Duke's own warehouses. Arthur Knowles stood on his balcony overlooking the frozen city and permitted himself a single glass of celebration. The estates were nearly his. The war would enrich him, and the only witness lay under 6 feet of snow, in a forest no one would search until spring thaw. "My lord," his steward appeared, hesitant, a rider from the border. "The emperor has requested a formal audience before the assembled court of Wintermere. He says he comes to answer the charge of abduction. He comes with only 50 men. 50 men! The Duke laughed softly into the winter air. The famous wolf walks into the pen and calls it courage. Grant the audience. Summon every lord in the realm to witness it. I will accuse him before the entire court, and by nightfall we shall have our war with all the continent's sympathy behind us." He drained the glass. Somewhere north, in a fortress of ash and ice, a duchess in an ivory gown fastened a silver cloak at her throat and asked her emperor if she looked sufficiently like a ghost. "No," Rowan said. "You look like a verdict." The great hall of Wintermere had witnessed coronations, treasons, and one memorable incident involving an archbishop and a goat. It had never in 400 years fallen as silent as it did that afternoon. The Emperor of the North entered first, black and silver, unhurried, 50 soldiers halting at the door as agreed. Duke Arthur Knowles rose from his place of honor, black morning silk gleaming, and his voice rang with magnificent grief. "Before this court, I name you Rowan Weston, abductor and murderer of my beloved wife." "Which wife?" the Emperor asked mildly. "The one you mourn, or the one behind me?" The doors opened. Victoria Morgan walked into the great hall of Wintermere, alive, visibly with child, dressed in ivory and wrapped in the Emperor's silver cloak. She walked the full length of that endless floor, with her head high, past lords who had wept at her funeral, and she watched the color drain from her husband's face, like wine from a tipped glass. "My lords," she said, and her voice, trained in a mountain fortress, reached every corner. "I apologize for missing my own funeral. I understand the marble was very fine." Uproar. The Duke recovered fast. He had always been fast. Sorcery of grief. "My lords, this poor creature was abducted, her mind broken. She has been made the tyrant's puppet." "Then let the puppet ask one question." Victoria turned to the hall. "My lords, your villages starved these past 2 winters. You were told the harvests failed. Ask the Duke why his granaries at Marlow Cross required 40 new locks. She is unwell. Ask him why the prison rolls list 400 men who never came home, while his mines never once lacked labor. Hysteria. Ask him," Victoria said, drawing out a green leather ledger, "why every answer is written here, in his own hand." Sienna stepped forward with the half-burned letter. A grey-bearded guard, the same guard who had thrown Victoria into the snow and had not slept a whole night since, stepped forward next, and knelt, and confessed to everything. The Duke looked around the great hall and found, for the first time in his gilded life, not a single friendly face. So he drew his blade. Arthur Knowles was many rotten things, but he had been fencing champion of 3 courts. and he crossed the hall toward his pregnant wife, faster than any guard could react. Any guard but one. Steel rang against steel. Captain Sam Curtis stood between the blade and the Duchess, entirely calm, parrying with the bored efficiency of a man swatting expensive flies. "Yield, my lord," Curtis suggested. "You are embarrassing the marble." The Duke lunged for Victoria instead, and Curtis's sword took him across the wrist, spinning the blade away, and the next thing Wintermere's finest fencing champion knew, he was face down on the floor of his own great hall, arrested by a man who then apologized to the court for the noise. What followed was not the war Wintermere had feared. It was surgery. The Emperor's forces did not touch a single village. They seized the palace, the counting houses, and the private granaries at Marlow Cross, where soldiers broke 40 new locks and found grain stacked to the rafters, while children starved a mile away. Rowan ordered every door opened. That night, wagons of bread rolled into the parishes, and people who had cursed the northern tyrant's name wept into his soldiers' hands. The corrupt court of Wintermere did burn, but with witnesses, ledgers, and law. 14 lords, 2 magistrates, and 1 bishop were arrested with their crimes read aloud, in public square after public square. The old crown, rotten to its hollow center, abdicated in disgrace, and on the coldest night of that long winter, the people of Wintermere gathered in the streets to watch a single symbolic fire, the Duke's forged contracts, his false funeral banners, and his ledgers of hunger, burning in the palace courtyard until the ash rose like black snow. Victoria stood beside the Emperor as the flames climbed. "You promised to burn a kingdom for me," she said. "I burned what was killing it," Rowan answered. "The rest, we build." Behind them, entirely deadpan, Sam Curtis remarked that he had now survived 3 sieges, 2 poisonings, and 1 royal courtship, and the courtship had been by far the most dangerous. Victoria's daughter was born on the first morning of the thaw, in a warm room in the fortress of ash and ice, with Maya Stanley commanding the birth like a general, and Sienna crying harder than the baby. They named her Rose, for the flower that survives winter underground. Justice moved in the weeks that followed, and everyone received exactly what their choices had purchased. Arthur Knowles, stripped of title, lands, and name, was imprisoned in the northern fortress of Coldwell Keep, the very stretch of frozen country where he had left his wife to die. He was given warm clothes, regular meals, and a window facing the snow. Mercy, Rowan said, was allowing him to live. Justice was the view. The repentant guard who confessed was spared the gallows and sentenced to 10 years rebuilding the villages his silence had starved. He served them willingly. Sienna, the maid who stole the truth from a fire, was granted land, freedom, and a title of her own, and turned scarlet when the herald read it aloud. Maya Stanley was named chief physician of the realm, and given the old duke's confiscated fortune to build a royal hospital for mothers and the poor, where no woman's pain would ever again be dismissed as hysteria. Sam Curtis was promoted to Lord Commander. At the ceremony, witnesses swear, he smiled. He denies it to this day, and in spring, before the assembled peoples of 2 realms, the Emperor of the North knelt. He had already restored Victoria's estates, already sealed her independence into law, her lands hers, her fortune hers, her daughter's inheritance untouchable by any husband, including himself. Only then, owning nothing of her, did he ask. "You once had no choice," Rowan said, the crown of the North in his scarred hands. "So I give you one, freely, before the world. Marry me or refuse me, and either way, you remain the freest woman on this continent." Victoria looked at this feared, gentle, impossible man, kneeling in the melting snow, little Rose asleep against her shoulder. "I chose you in a blizzard," she said. "This is simply the paperwork. The continent still argues about what was louder that day, the cheering, or Lord Commander Curtis muttering that weddings remained worse than sieges, while wiping his eyes with a military dispatch. Humble viewers, Our candle burns low, and the final page of this tale draws near. But before the last word is spoken, we ask one favor of your generous hearts. If Victoria's courage warmed you, if the Emperor's love stirred you, if you believe cruelty must never speak the final word, then subscribe to Forbidden Palace and help our court reach its grand milestone of 1,000 noble souls. Leave a like upon this story and tell us in the comments, should Victoria have shown the Duke forgiveness, or did the view from Coldwell Keep suit him perfectly? Subscribe to see how our next tale unfolds, and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going. Every subscription is a stone in this palace. Every comment is a voice in its halls. Thank you truly for building it with us. Now, the ending our Duchess has earned. And so, humble viewers, Victoria Morgan's story did not end in the snow. The husband who threw her away lost his name, his fortune, and his freedom, and spends his winters watching the same frozen fields he once chose for her grave. The maid who was brave became a lady. The healer who was ignored became the healer of a nation. The soldier who never smiled found one thing worth smiling for. And the emperor the world called Ruthless proved that true power is measured not by what a man can destroy, but by whom he chooses to protect. The woman abandoned beneath the winter pines became an empress, not because a man crowned her, but because she stood up in the snow, walked into a hall full of her enemies, and told the truth out loud. May this tale remind us all, reputation is what a man wears, but character is what he is. Silence protects the guilty, and the coldest night can still give birth to the brightest dawn. Thank you for gathering with us in the halls of Forbidden Palace. Until our next tale of mystery, romance, betrayal, and royal consequence, remain noble in heart and courageous in spirit. Educational value and moral lessons. Silence protects the guilty, not the peace. Victoria believed staying quiet would keep her safe. In truth, it only gave her husband time to plan. Speaking up, with evidence and witnesses, is what finally stopped him. Abuse often hides behind wealth and reputation. The Duke was admired, elegant, and publicly mourned his lost wife, while being the very danger she needed saving from. Character and reputation are not the same thing. Cold is a medical emergency for pregnant women. As Maya taught, a freezing body pulls warm blood away from the womb. A pregnant woman in extreme cold has far less time than others. Warmth, small frequent meals, slow rewarming of frozen limbs, never rubbing, and urgent care save 2 lives at once. Real love asks, it never takes. Rowan secured Victoria's freedom, wealth, and independence before proposing, so her yes could never be forced. Love that controls, shames, or threatens is not love. False accusations destroy lives. One lie about Victoria's child was designed to erase her name, her inheritance, and her baby's future. Accusations are weapons. Courts and communities must demand proof. Justice should reach the powerful. Every noble, magistrate, and bishop in the grain scandal faced public trial. A system that only punishes the weak is not justice, it is decoration. Servants and ordinary people see the truth. Sienna, a maid, carried the evidence that toppled a duke. No witness is too small. Good leadership feeds people before it frightens them. The ruthless emperor's first order in a conquered kingdom was to open the granaries. Power is proven by protection.